Hello, novel lovers. Today's story is irresistible. The love between Will and his mate is full of challenges. As an enforcer, Will's strong sense of responsibility and protectiveness often put him in a struggle when facing his mate. Once, seeking ways to control his emotions, he took his mate to a seas and senior for advice. But during the test, Will lost control and almost hurt the senior. His mate, despite being physically weak, comforted him best. This experience changed their relationship and made Will re-examine his enforcer identity and bond with his mate. Follow me to explore their story. Chapter 21. I lost track of time as I observed Will from my hidden vantage point. Despite my enhanced senses, I remained undetected, watching as he and the others trained in the field. Will's protective nature was evident as he repeatedly glanced towards the eastern forest, his body language betraying growing tension. I inhaled deeply, my heightened olfactory abilities searching for any unusual scents, but found nothing amiss. My other senses, though limited in range, also failed to detect any threats in that direction. During a break, Will strode to the field's edge, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Even from a distance, I could sense his mounting worry. Suddenly, his calm voice entered my mind, contrasting sharply with the anxiety I perceived. "How is it going?" I couldn't help but grin, realizing he was oblivious to my proximity. "Pretty good," I replied. "Big haul of mushrooms. That bag Tiffany lent me is full." Curiosity tinged his mental voice. "Are you heading back?" "No, I got distracted." Through our bond, I sensed a surge of worry and jealousy, though his voice only betrayed a hint of concern. Distracted with what? Amused, I sent him a mental image of himself staring eastward. Shock reverberated through our connection as he spun around, scanning the tree line until his gaze found me. Relief washed over his features, and he broke into a sprint towards my position. The others, noticing Will's sudden movement, spotted me and grinned. I stood as he approached, and within moments, I was engulfed in his strong arms. My feet left the ground as he spun me in circles, his joy palpable. "How long have you been here?" "I'm not entirely sure. I was here when the 6 fighters left for their patrol shift." He blinked, astonished. "That was nearly 2 hours ago." I shrugged, feeling a bit shy. "As I said, I got distracted and lost track of time," tilting his head, curiosity evident in his voice. He asked, what was so distracting about it? In response, I shared a vivid mental image from earlier while stretching, his muscles gleaming in the sunlight, sweat glistening on his skin. It was a sight I had carefully committed to memory. A low rumble emanated from his chest, startling me. I glanced up to see his eyes darken, a mix of pride, love, and possessiveness radiating from him. Despite his attempts to suppress it, I sensed his rising desire, causing a slight blush to color my cheeks. I ducked my head and wrapped my arms around him in a hug as I leaned my head against his chest so he couldn't see my rising blush. He wrapped his arms around me tightly as he took a deep breath. I could sense his struggle for control, and his frustration that he was hyped for control. After a few minutes, he sighed deeply. I didn't think it would be this hard. He didn't seem bothered by the fact that he knew I could sense what he was feeling. I rubbed my hand along his back. "It is hitting you harder than it is hitting me. Some of the things I am occasionally sensing are pointing to your enforcer role." He was silent in thought. I let go and stepped back. I said, "I can sit on the sidelines if you want to go to practice more." He glanced back at the training area where the others continued their practice. I felt a faint shimmer of jealousy and protectiveness roll across his mind. He didn't want either the men or women down there. He ran his hand through his hair in slight frustration before saying, "Would you mind accompanying me as I visit someone?" I am hoping he might have some advice on how to control some of my reactions before I do something I regret. I nodded. "Let's just drop these mushrooms off with the cooks." He picked up the bag for me and started walking. I gave a small, uncomfortable cough to catch his attention, and he glanced back at me in confusion. I clarified. As much as I am enjoying the view of you wandering around without a shirt, a jealous side of me doesn't want the younger cooks to stare. He started to smirk, and a light blush touched my cheeks. I never had need to be jealous before I met Will, and I was trying to come to terms with these new emotions. He seemed to be getting a kick out of my jealousy. He gestured with his head across the meadow. Head towards that path, and I will meet you there. He went back to the training area to grab a shirt. He beat me to the wide path that led through the trees. We walked hand in hand towards the pack house. The cooks were happy with the mushrooms that we left here for them. I walked beside Will as we headed towards some cottages. Will knocked on a door and waited. It was opened by an older man. His hair had gone mostly gray, and my senses immediately identified him as a retired enforcer. His lean frame would still be the equal of the younger, active enforcers. While he was technically retired, he would join in if any serious fight broke out. He just wouldn't do much with the smaller day-to-day stuff. He smiled. Will, good to see you again. What brings you here? His eyes drifted over to me in curiosity. And who is this? Will replied, good to see you as well. Tony, this is my mate. I am here because I am hoping that you have some advice or tricks since I have had some control issues lately. With a nod, Tony said, let's go over to the reinforced training room and see what we can do. Tony left the house and started walking with us as he asked, when did you two meet? Will replied, 3 days ago. Tony looked at me closely. You are not marked, and the bond has not been completed. Correct. I turned a bit red at the topic, but nodded. Tony turned his attention to Will. What kind of control problems have you encountered so far? Will made a face as he honestly answered his mentor. The very first day, I almost attacked Fred when he snarled at her. Since then, I have almost lost control for times. And of those 4, a couple occurred when no one else was even around. I glanced at him. 4 times. I knew about our game of keep away and the image of my father. His control minutes ago had been pushed, but he hadn't come close to losing control. What other times had there been? Tony gave him an odd look. Have you been trying various techniques in case one is more effective? I have tried them all. I have never had problems with my control before, and it has me severely off balance. I am scared that I am going to injure someone. Have you had any indication that you may harm Jade? Will shook his head violently. No, the need to mark her is strong, but the control problems are occurring if I worry about her safety or if she is away from me. We approached the building, and Tony opened the door and went inside. I followed behind Will. Chapter 22. We entered an enclosed training room, and Tony led us to the back of the room and down some stairs. I looked around the large basement room as the heavy metal door closed behind me. The entire room was lined with some sort of metal plates, covered in numerous dents and scratches. Will spoke quietly. This is a room usually used for training enforcers. The steel plates can usually handle any damage that may result from a slip in control when we are learning or trying something out. I nodded in understanding. Tony looked as he said, If you don't mind. I want to try a few things just to gauge Will's reaction. What do you want me to do? I replied, well, just try some basic stuff at first. Can you please go to the far side of the room? I walked to the far side of the room. Tony appraised Will's expression as he walked into the middle of the room between us. He said, Will. Will was still relaxed. I would prefer her closer to me, but nothing that worries me. Tony walked over to stand beside me. Now I don't like, Will said, with a frown. Even just the thought of a guy standing beside her doesn't sit well with me. Irritating, but it is controllable. Possibly because I know you well. I am not sure how it would handle if it were a stranger. Will's emotions were starting to faintly simmer as the mate bond was making its presence known. Barely noticeable, but I could sense it affecting his surface emotions. Tony nodded and turned to me, holding out his hand for a handshake. I reached out, and even before I made contact, Will let out a low growl. Tony pulled back his hand and regarded Will with a raised eyebrow. Will rubbed his forehead and apologized to the man who had trained him. Sorry. It was too bad when she was just standing there. But the instant she reached out to you, I couldn't help it. Tony walked back to the middle of the room. That reaction is actually quite typical for most higher-ranking males while their mate is unmarked. Which for times did you almost lose control? I was chasing her and couldn't get through a bramble bush. Will said as he leaned against the far wall, more relaxed now that Tony was near me. The thought that I couldn't get to her nearly made me lose it. This morning, she was trying to wake me up and showed me a picture of her parents. I flipped until I realized that there were two people in the image and that the man was her father. Will sighed as he continued. I almost bolted today when I realized that she was up in a tree and I was scared that she would fall. The only reason I didn't run to her was because I didn't know where she was. Then, when she didn't contact me after several hours, I was nearly ready to run through the forest, searching for her scent. Thankfully, she responded when I mind-linked her, and it turned out that she was just up on the hill watching me. Will rubbed his temple as he admitted, "It is taking less to push me to the breaking point. I can feel the difference in how paranoid I am being, even from this morning to this afternoon. Just yesterday, we were both surprised at how little trouble I had with others being near her, even unmated males that I knew well. Yet, today, I didn't even want her near any of the people on the training field." Tony regarded him silently for a few minutes while thinking. He mind-spoke me. "There is one technique that may help. Do you happen to have a rather harmless memory that is likely to make him struggle for control?" I considered his suggestion for a moment. "Is this wise? I don't want you to get hurt. I did have one guy offer to buy me a dress yesterday, and from what I have seen, that will make him fight for control." I shared the memory with Tony so he could evaluate it for himself. "If he has control issues, he won't be able to fight as well," he replied. "His strength may go up, but his strategy will be gone since he won't be able to concentrate on it. That memory will work perfectly. You were not interested, and Tiffany was there to protect you. The rogues lost all interest and left after they learned that Will was your mate. The event is over and not on the pack's territory. Give me a few seconds." Tony turned to Will and spoke aloud. "I am going to get Jay to share a memory of a past event. She was in no danger, and those present left after learning that you are her mate. So they pose no threat to the mate bond. Keep that in mind. I will stand here. Jade will remain where she is, and you are going to try to stay where you are." Will looked uneasy, but nodded. Tony glanced at me and nodded. I focused my eyes on Will and shared the memory of the rogue offering to buy me the dress before Tiffany sent both of them packing. Will's snarl echoed through the room the exact moment that I felt his control snap like an over-tight and guitar string. By the time I blinked, Will was in the middle of the room, and Tony had him mostly pinned. Will was going down without a fight though, and the experienced enforcer was having obvious difficulties trying to hold him. I froze, not entirely sure what to do. How had that memory set him off? I had expected him to have difficulties controlling himself, but not for him to completely lose control. Tony had not expected it either, although he had been prepared just in case. It was safe for me to try and approach the fighters in an all-out brawl. I watched as Tony struggled in his attempt to subdue or pin Will. As an older and more experienced enforcer, Tony Schulten have had as much trouble containing Will. Will looked towards me and saw my wide-eyed gaze. I felt his emotions spike, with rage and protectiveness at the forefront. He let out a vicious snarl as he broke Tony's hold with ease. A swift kick sent Tony to the side, and Will practically blurred with speed as he appeared in a fighting crouch in front of me. His back was to me as he faced Tony, and vicious growls rumbled unceasingly from his chest. Tony cautiously got to his feet before backing up a few steps to give Will more room to calm down. Tony mind-spoke me. "Be careful. It would be best if you just stayed there until he regains control." I didn't expect his reaction to be quite so severe. If he feels that the mate bond is in danger, there is a chance he may mark you by force if you try anything at the moment. He isn't thinking straight. Well, just wait it out. I nodded and remained where I was. Tony backed up until he was against the far wall and leaned against it while waiting. Will's growling slowly grew quieter as the seconds passed. I could feel his emotions subsiding. I felt when he started to struggle for control again. Once he was getting the upper hand on it, I walked forward to hold his hand and lean my head against his arm. The direct contact gave him the strength to fully regain control. Will used my handhold to pull me to his chest for a big bear hug. He buried his face in my neck, eating my scent to calm himself. I felt his emotions returning to normal. He finally lifted his head and turned to look at Tony with worry as he asked, "Are you all right?" "Just bruises at the moment," Tony replied, shrugging nonchalantly. Will released me from his hug, but didn't relinquish my hand. I turned so I could also see Tony while Will and I held hands. Will apologized to Tony. "Sorry about that. That was exactly what I was scared of happening. I don't recall Roland being this bad when he first met Emily. Every unmated male simply had to keep their distance until things those two. I am losing it over memories and plants." Tony's voice was quiet as he confirmed, "Roll and Wasp this dad. Your first reactions were the mate bond. Plain and simple. Those were normal and controllable. That last one somehow tapped into your enforcer abilities and shattered your control. It was at that point where we encountered problems. So we simply have to figure out what is triggering your enforcer role." Will looked confused. What could have triggered it? And why would it be getting worse? Tony looked deep in thought, trying to determine the problem. "When you first lost it, you weren't really trying to attack me. You were trying to get to Jade. I was having difficulty holding you back, but I was managing it. I was hoping to pin you until you came to your senses, and it would have created a buffer in the mate bond that would have helped. At that point, it was mostly the mate bond, but something happened just before you broke my hold. It was like your enforcer mind frame and the mate bond somehow short-circuited with each other and joined forces. Do you recall what happened at that point?" Will spoke as if the answer should have been obvious. Jade looked concerned and scared, and I walked beside her. Tony furrowed his eyebrows in thought for several minutes while Will and I watched him. Tony asked me, "Do you have children, or is there any possible chance that you might be pregnant?" I turned a bit red at the question, but shook my head. "Yo, why?" Tony sighed faintly. "Such behavior is common among higher-ranking wolves if their mates have young children, and especially if their mates are with child. Even if he wasn't aware of it, the mate bond would cause such instability and overprotectiveness." He shook his head before examining me again. He asked, "Do you have any sort of injury that may create a vulnerability that would also create such overreactions?" I blinked as a thought occurred to me. "I am not injured," I said, "but would being a runt count as a vulnerability? Now that I think about it, most of Will's controlled problems occurred when we were apart." Tony's eyes widened. "You are a runt." His shock and disbelief was evident in both his expression and with my senses. I nodded and shifted so he could see it for himself. He stared at my wolf form for a few moments before Will gave him a small warning growl. Tony shook his head to recollect his thoughts. "Well, that explains it," he said, massaging his temples. I shifted back, although I was sure what Tony was referring to. Will was also looking at him in confusion. Will asked, "What do you mean?" Tony replied, "The mate bond knows that she is more or less defenseless, and it is amplifying the protective tendencies that come with being an enforcer. So, you have an overactive mate bond on one hand. On the other hand, as an enforcer, you would normally defend any member of the pack, but particularly the weaker or defenseless ones." Tony turned his gaze to me, further explaining, "If the already amplified mate bond somehow convinces Will that your safety is at stake, it also kicks in his role and drive as an enforcer and they join forces. That is when the control problems start. Essentially, until everything settles down, Will's control is like a loose can and where you are concerned." I tilted my head. "Once I am marked, will things start to settle down?" Tony nodded. "Yes, but from what I have heard, things won't truly stabilize until the bond is completed. He will always be a bit touchy when it comes to your safety just because he is an enforcer." Will looked curious, inquiring, "What have you heard?" Has this happened before? Tony crossed his arms as he regarded Will. My own teacher used a case study where an alpha ended up with a runt for a mate. His control was even worse than yours since he was an alpha. Within the day, the two of them went to a secluded part of their territory for a week until things settled down. That didn't reassure Will, and ran his hand through his hair. How much worse is this going to get? Any tips or advice? My eyes were drawn to his messed up hair, and I forced myself to focus on the conversation at hand instead. Hopefully not too much worse, Tony said with a shrug. Ensure that she's with other women that you trust during the day. It is just when her safety is in question that you have trouble. Otherwise, you are simply dealing with the mate bond, which you are handling quite well. We headed back upstairs to discuss other possible options for calming Will back down if he started having control problems. Tony gave me some general guidelines as to what I should and shouldn't do. Chapter 23. Will didn't have any issues the rest of the evening. He flopped backwards onto the bed with a groan. I chuckled and shifted into wolf form, his chest to gaze down at him. He opened his eyes and smiled up at me. You have no idea how hard it was to not feed you that dessert. I wolf grinned at him in amusement while wagging my tail. I had sensed his internal struggle during supper, but since it was just the mate bond being its usual pushy self, it hadn't worried me. He grinned at my expression as he linked his hands behind his head. He took a deep breath as he closed his eyes. Quite relaxed now that we were alone. I lay down and slid halfway off his chest before shifting back to human form. I was now leaning on top of Will's chest while the rest of my body rested on the bed. His eyes opened in surprise, and I grinned at his reaction. I said, "Yeah, I felt it as I was eating. I didn't pry, but it was quite clearly reflected in your surface emotions. Although you did manage to maintain your composure remarkably well," reaching up to caress my cheek. He said, "What exactly can you sense? I know in theory that Elmgaza can sense general emotions, but I am not sure how much they can pick up." I tilted my head as I considered it. It does depend on how strong one's ability is, and mine is pretty strong in that area. I can pick up a person's overall mood if they are in the vicinity. If they are close by, I can look deeper, so to speak, and can sense the weaker emotions or if someone is trying to hide an emotion. I generally don't look below the surface, neither do most Elmgaza. He inquired, "What do my surface emotions show at the moment?" "Mostly contentment, some curiosity, and an undertone of love." I grinned. With a faint smile, he raised an eyebrow. "Just an undertone of love." I chuckled as I admitted, "It pretty much leaks through your other emotions like water through a sieve." He rolled over so that I was underneath him while he was propped up on his elbows. He grinned at me. "Let's see if this has any effect." He leaned down to kiss me on my lips. Sparks exploded from our kiss, and it felt like a shock to my system, like a powerful drug. It was addictive and I instantly wanted more. I reached up to run my one hand through his hair as our kiss deepened on its own accord. His hands moved to lightly hold my head on either side as a low possessive growl rumbled in Will's chest. His own emotions were as chaotic as my own. Desire and want were the most noticeable emotions in Wilzora at this point. I was much better. Will gently broke the kiss as we breathed hard. Neither of us had been prepared for what had just happened. Will's eyes were dark as he panted. "It might be best if you shifted. Your wolf form doesn't provoke such emotions." I swiftly shifted before leaning up to lick the side of his face. He relaxed and rolled to the side so he was lying beside me. He said, "I hadn't expected that. And from your reaction, neither did you." I snuggled closer to him without answering. He chuckled at my lack of response. His desire and want had swiftly receded once I shifted, to be replaced by a protective mindset. He scooped me up before climbing under the covers. His arms held me close as we slowly fell asleep. It no longer surprised me to wake up curled tightly against Will's chest. One would think that he was scared of me disappearing as he slept. I thought about simply relaxing, but I had my own priorities this morning. I managed to turn my head to examine his brown hair. I nuzzled my nose deep in his hair. It was so soft. I exhaled slowly in contentment. although I did resist the urge to lick it like I had the other day. He would probably think that there was something wrong with me if I did it again. I tried to extend my senses to pick up Will's emotions as he slept. It wasn't easy since sleep created a barrier in the mind as the subconscious took over. I wasn't entirely sure that I would be able to do it, although our direct contact gave me a chance. A few moments later, I picked up little flickers deep in Will's mind. I concentrated on them, trying to identify them. I had never delved so deep into someone's mind before. It was an odd feeling, like swimming down through pitch-black water as I tried to see the bottom. I could see his emotions like dozens of small glittering pebbles, and I could guess their identity. The brightest ones were love, contentment, protectiveness, and possessiveness. I was somehow surprised to see small flickers of jealousy and fear. These small pebbles were all scattered around a larger golden stone with a soft and steady glow. It was oddly familiar, but I cowed and placed it. I pushed myself deeper into Will's mind, trying to identify it. I hovered right above it as I looked at it, still confused by its presence. It was somehow influencing all of his other emotions, where the others were simply flickering or glittering. This one gave off a steady faint glow. I was having great difficulty remaining this deep in Will's mind, and my ability to sense emotions was being taxed to the utmost. Despite the short distance between my senses and this weird stone, my senses were unable to identify it. I reached out to gently touch it since the contact would allow me to know exactly what it was. A lightning bolt of light slashed through my mind and body as I was blasted back into my own head by the force. I winced as the worst headache I had ever experienced hit me like a semi. While also jolted awake, I felt disorientation, concern, and confusion wash over his now awake mind. It felt like my senses were suffering from whiplash, and his emotions were like bright sunlight during a major hangover. I quickly shielded my bruised and battered senses, which provided some relief. Will glanced around the room groggily before looking down at me. "What happened?" he asked. "It feels like someone blinded me with the brightest camera flash ever invented." It was so strange to not be able to know which emotions he was experiencing. I kept my mind voice quiet so that he wouldn't be able to detect just how bad my headache was. "I was trying to identify an emotion in your mind, and I think I accidentally touched the mate bond. Simply coming into contact with such a powerful thing overwhelmed my senses and has given me a nice headache as a souvenir." That was one thing that I had been warned about when my ability to sense other emotions had turned out to be stronger than average. Do not come into contact with a mate bond or attempt to influence it. An established mate bond was a link of incandescent energy between mates, and could be found if one dug that far into someone's mind. I had never pried into someone's mind like that, but other Ongaza had shared their memories of what it looked like. For someone to touch it with their senses would generally knock them out cold for days. I hadn't recognized it for what it was since the bond hadn't been completed yet. The only reason I was still conscious was because Will was my mate and I had only touched it, which had temporarily flared it into life from its semi. Its sheer power had caused my headache, although I suspected that if I had tried to harm or damage it, that it would have flattened me. Will looked at me and worried. "Are you okay?" "Yeah. My senses are just a bit bruised, and I have shielded them for the time being. They should recover quickly enough. Don't expect me to guess your mind frame or love control while I have my shields up." "Are you sure you are okay?" Will looked somewhat doubtful. I grinned at him despite my pounding head. "You said you felt as if someone had used a camera with a powerful flash. Well, your eyes were closed because you were asleep. But I was looking right at the camera without realizing what it was when the flash went off. Much like a camera. It will take a bit for the spots to fade." Will sighed and leaned his head against mine before muttering, "You really have to start sleeping in so that I wake up first." I snickered and twisted my head so I could nuzzle his neck. My stomach growled, and it was his turn to chuckle as he sat up and stretched. I cowed and figured out how he didn't have kinks in his back and neck from sleeping while curled around me like that all night. I shook to try and straighten out my fur, which didn't help my headache any. I yawned and shifted so that I was sitting on the edge of the bed in human form. Will looked at my face, obviously trying to see how much my head hurt. I had been expecting it and carefully composed my face so that he wouldn't be able to see a battering ram pounding away merrily in my head. He relaxed and said, "Feel like a run before breakfast." I really felt like curling up in the darkest corner I could find while waiting for my headache to fade. But that would give me away. It was either help out in the kitchen or go for a run, and I didn't think that my head would be able to take the clanging and banging of heavy pots. I said, "Why don't we go to that thick section of the forest to the north?" Will nodded and grabbed a change of clothes. I picked out one of my new outfits before we both headed off to the bathrooms to change. The forest to the north would be dim due to the dense canopy, and the underbrush was thick enough that we wouldn't be going very fast through it. Chapter 24. Thankfully, my headache had faded somewhat by the time we got back to the pack house. It hadn't relented that much though, and my shields were still up since my senses felt rather battered and sensitive. Will didn't say anything, but he must have figured out that the headache hadn't abated. I noticed that he stayed very close to my side as we filled our plates. We went to go sit with Samantha and John. I put my plate down, but before I could sit, Will pulled me onto his lap before pulling my plate in front of me. He gently rested his chin on top of my head as he declared, "This is a much better arrangement in my mind." I blushed slightly, which caused John to chuckle as he glanced at Samantha. "You guys may claim that I was bad," John said, "but you have to admit that I never did that." Samantha grinned at us. "True, if I didn't have my own mate, I would find these two almost intolerable while trying to eat." Will's voice was amused as he replied, "It isn't as if we were kissing. You are getting all worked up over nothing." I shook my head and took a bite of my waffle. Thankfully, they stopped talking in favor of eating. I savored my food, still enjoying the things that I simply had never gotten to enjoy while being a rogue. One perk of being on Will's lap was that he was unable to stare at my face for most of the meal. He often glanced down, but I was short enough that all he saw was the top of my head. It was somewhat amusing that his plan had backfired on him. I looked up at him and grinned innocently as slightly frustrated expression. "Impish lie." I inquired, "Is something wrong?" He made a face. I apparently didn't think my plan through. "I always enjoyed watching you eat since you look as if each bite is the best thing you ever tasted. I can't see your expression, and it's driving me crazy." I laughed at the predicament that he'd put himself in. He seemed fascinated by my smiling face so close to his. He tilted his head and held a slice of strawberry up to my lips. I opened my mouth, and he popped it in. I chewed and closed my eyes as I enjoyed the sweet fruit. I could feel his gaze on my upturned face even without my senses. I opened my eyes in amusement to see him staring intently at my face. I blushed slightly as he grinned. He held up a bite-sized piece of waffle. I humored him and let him feed me that before too long. Will glanced down at the table. "Your plate is empty." His voice sounded surprised. I glanced down and saw that he was correct. He fed me most of my breakfast by hand. John started snickering. "I was wondering how much time was going to pass before you looked away from her." Samantha swatted John's arm. "Let them enjoy themselves in peace." It was kind of amusing to see the big, bad enforcer acting like that. Although, if they start kissing during meals with that kind of intensity, I am out of here. I ducked my head as I felt a blush heat up my cheeks and neck. I had forgotten about our audience. I normally relied on my senses to alert me when others focused their attention on me, and my shields had prevented me from being reminded of their presence. Samantha grinned at my reaction. "Ah, look at her blush. Leave it to Will to get an innocent one." She shook her head. On a more serious note, "I hear the cooks are hoping for more mushrooms. The one cook, Sylvia, is hoping for more truffles since there is a market in a week, and they will fetch an excellent price." My blush faded as I felt Will tense up slightly. I said, "The mushrooms are easy enough to gather in human form. I would need to be in wolf form to send the truffles. If I am going to be spending that much time in wolf form, I would like someone else with me, just in case a large predator shows up." A low rumble echoed from Will's chest, and I rubbed his arm in reassurance. Will's eyes went unfocused for a few minutes before he looked down at me. I just spoke with a couple of people who can accompany you, he said. The one lady wants to be more familiar with the closer sections of forest since she usually scouts along the border, and the other one pulled a muscle in her leg. It will probably be mostly healed by this afternoon, but in the meantime, she can't do much in training or ghost scouting. Both are willing to help you pick mushrooms. I replied, that works for me. They can pick mushrooms while I check the area to see if I can stumble across another truffle. You should finish your breakfast though. You seem to have forgotten it in your distraction. He smiled at my change of topic and picked up his fork to eat a mouthful of omelette. He inspected my expression while eating before saying, please stay near them and don't go climbing any trees. I don't think my nerves could take another stunt like you pulled yesterday. I looked over at Samantha as I commented, I guess this means that I had better wait before telling him about the time when I lived in the mountains and climbed up the cliffs on a daily basis. She laughed as Will grumbled, I am so glad that there are no cliffs nearby. He made short work of his heaping plate of food. Chapter 25. The black-haired lady paused once more to carefully inspect the surrounding forest before bending down to pick a mushroom. I should have guessed that Will would have managed to find actual fighters to accompany me. The black-haired lady was quiet and reserved, and her stance practically screamed that she was a strong fighter. She was the distant type that made me somewhat uneasy. Had I seen her when I was a rogue, I would have hidden so she would have had no chance of even realizing that I had been in the area. The brown-haired lady was more relaxed and easygoing. She seemed amused to be picking mushrooms. Her slight limp wasn't bad enough to keep her from the training sessions. It looks like the overprotective mate Vaughn once more took Will for a loop around the block. I trotted through the area between them with my nose near the ground as I tried to find the scent of a deeply buried truffle. Being out of truffle season, I wasn't sure if I could find another of the rare and coveted objects. I was trying though. I was also keeping an eye on my two guards in disguise. They had obviously never picked mushrooms before. I ended up showing them how to identify some of the common ones, and they were just picking those ones. I mind-linked the brown-haired lady, although I let the other lady listen in. That looks just like the one I showed you earlier, but it is actually an uncommon poisonous lookalike. If it grows at the bottom of a pine, you can generally assume that type is inedible. I wasn't aware that they grew in this area or I would have mentioned it. She turned the mushroom over in her hand as she examined it. Her voice was curious. I don't see any differences in appearance. Is it just caution speaking or are you sure it is toxic? I trotted over to where it had been growing and dug up the small base from the leaf litter. I said, see the pink tinge? That is a sure sign it is toxic if trying to differentiate between these two. The toxic one also only grows on pine roots. I have enough practice to tell at a glance. She looked at the base I had dug up before nodding and dropping the mushroom that was guaranteed to give the consumer a nasty stomachache. I didn't bother mentioning that my Omega abilities had tipped me off. I still had my people and emotion sensing abilities shielded, but I could use the others. My headache was still present, although it had, thankfully, eased up. Neither lady had provided their names when Will had led me to them. I scooted under a bramble bush to drag out a large orange, capped mushroom and brought it closer to the black-haired lady since she was the nearest one at the moment. She put it in her basket. We slowly made our way through the forest. The two ladies would pick paths within eyesight of each other, and I would zigzag through the area between them as I dragged to reach mushrooms and kept my nose on alert for the faint earthy scent of a truffle. They were gathering quite a haul of mushrooms. I paused to lift my head and sniff before jumping onto a log to look around, informing them, I am picking up the scent of a bear, although I am not sure which direction the scent is coming from. Both ladies took sniffs of the air. The brown-haired lady spoke. I don't smell anything, but that may be because I am in human form. The black-haired lady narrowed her eyes before shifting into a sleek black wolf and darting off into the undergrowth. I resumed my search while remaining alert. A minute later, I heard vicious snarls quite some distance away. I glanced at the brown-haired lady who was looking in that direction. She saw me watching her and explained, well, oh witch, well, there was a black bear. She is chasing it away. I nodded and went to pull another big mushroom out from under a bramble bush. A while later, the black wolf trotted back and shifted. Looking at me intently, the lady asked, "Just how did you scent a bear from that kind of distance while you were up wooden?" I shrugged. Not easy's motion while in wolf form. I was a rogue for quite some time, and I am used to watching for very faint scents. There isn't much wind in this area, so the bear was probably heading away from us and had passed nearby. She didn't reply, although she kept glancing at me with a speculative gaze when she didn't think I was looking. I really didn't want to lower my shields to figure out what kind of emotions were going through her head since I had only recently gotten the upper hand over my headache. I shook out my fur and kept going. I took a deep breath and both ladies turned to face me while also testing the air despite being in human form. I grinned internally at their reactions as I lifted my nose to try and catch the elusive scent again. That way, I went to the left. I started digging underneath a fallen tree. A few minutes later, I backed out of the fair-sized hole I had dug. The brown-haired lady was kneeling beside me, and she had cleared back some of the dirt I had dug up. She looked into the hole before reaching in and carefully pulling out the fist-sized truffle. She put it in a transport box before getting to her feet again. A few hours later, both ladies had huge shoulder bags full of mushrooms. We also had decent-sized truffles in for small ones, which was an amazing find out of truffle season. This Paxil Inn seemed ideal for truffles. We were walking back, and they were ignoring most mushrooms, although I was still in wolf shape trying to see if I could locate another truffle. The two ladies were more relaxed now and walking closer together while keeping a close eye on me. I turned to circle around a patch of leaf litter and pine needles. Looking up at both of them, I asked, "Do you mind shifting? I want to see if you can pick up this scent." Both of them immediately shifted and trotted over. I sat down while they walked through the area that I had circled with their noses near the ground. The tawny wolf looked at me. "What are we supposed to be smelling?" I tilted my head. "Do you not sense something out of place in that patch?" She lowered her head and followed my original tracks exactly before regarding me once more. The black wolf was watching us silently as she slowly kept circling the area while sniffing, blinking slowly at them. I tried to be more specific as I asked, "Do you not pick up the faint trace of water willow?" The tawny wolf sniffed once more. "I suppose, but it is extremely faint. Why is it important?" I spoke slowly and softly. "There are no water willows near here. That scent does not belong. A rogue with a mask scent passed through here, and it couldn't have been more than a couple of hours ago, or else a scent that faint would have faded by now." Both wolves pinned back their ears with growls as they turned their heads to scan the trees. I shook my head at their actions and reassured them. "Whoever he was, he isn't nearby, or else I would have picked up his scent instead of his scent trail. My guess is that he passed through about an hour ago. He was moving quickly since his trail is patchy." The black wolf shook her head hard, and her voice was tight. "We have already alerted the sentries and scouts. We are heading straight back now, just in case." I sighed with their overreaction. I asked, "Daz will know?" The tawny wolf shook her head. "Tony advised us earlier to keep anything odd from Will if possible, as long as it was not an emergency. He says that you get to break the news to him when you two are alone." I sighed in relief. That is probably a good idea with how he has been going overboard lately. Both wolves looked amused. I guess they agreed with me. I started an easy lope towards the distant pack house as the other two stayed close to me, although their pace was a slow trot. Not far from the first location, I picked up a faint scent of pine and alder bush. I knew this scent and didn't mention it since he was not the type to cause trouble. No wonder the first rogue's trail had been patchy with his speed. I suspected that the second rogue was in pursuit of the first rogue. JISK may not start trouble, but he would sure finish it, and it would probably take an enforcer or an alpha to bring the fierce rogue to a standstill. I didn't whatever rogue JISK was after. If he was chasing it, it was one of the nasty types. We got back to the pack house with no other traces of rogues. Although I had stopped to dig up another baseball-sized truffle, I could tell that my two shadows were getting impatient and restless with my slow pace. They were on high alert and likely itching to go help search for the trespassers, but it was like I could go any faster. We headed straight for the kitchen where the people were waiting for the mushrooms. Sylvia was delighted for the truffles and went to go store them in a special setup. I remained to help those present clean and wash the mushrooms. It didn't escape my attention that my 2 guards had disappeared as they dropped the mushrooms off. I shook my head in amusement as I scrubbed the various types of mushrooms. I highly doubted that Will could ever convince them to accompany me again, let alone go mushroom hunting. Chapter 26. We were about halfway done cleaning the mushrooms when Will mind-linked me. "Where are you?" He had been mind-linking me every hour or so all day, checking on me to see if I was doing all right. His calmness meant that he likely had not been informed of the rogue yet, and I certainly was not about to tell him. I replied, "In the kitchen, helping clean the mushrooms." I could feel his relief that I was in the pack house again. "Did you find many?" I sent my amusement down the link along with the image of the 2 guards having to walk carefully to avoid spilling their overloaded bags of mushrooms. "Quite a haul, actually. Expect mushrooms with supper." We even found a few truffles, although I had to dig halfway to China to get the one. I felt his amusement as he found the image hilarious. I could almost picture him shaking his head in disbelief. "All right," he said, "as long as I know you are okay. I am going to chase this new batch of trainees around the field a few times. Have fun." I felt his amusement. I guessed that the trainees were younger wolves who were just starting their training, and they were not going to be considering this as fun. We were just finishing up when the alpha mind linked the entire pack. "Please keep close to town and keep your eyes open. We have found 1 dead rogue in the western forest, and we have not yet discovered who killed him." I was not surprised. I also doubted that they were going to find Jisk. The only way they would find him is if an Omega with a strong wolf sensing ability was nearby, or if he let himself be found. He was the one who had taught me how to use the forest highway and how to mask my scent properly. He had been like a brother when I was growing up in no man's land. Will's worry voice entered my mind as he immediately checked on me. "You are still in the pack house." Vampire Deception by Drake Mason and Eli Grat. As an undocumented changeling, and forced to pose as a low-level witch. "Yes, still in the kitchen with a dozen others in the same room," I replied, my voice calm to keep him from worrying. His voice carried relief. "Please stay in the pack house. If you want to leave, please let me know. I have to go see if we can track down whoever killed that rogue. And we have no idea where the killer went." I reassured him. "I will stay here and call if anything seems amiss. One perk of my small size is I can fit in that gap under these cupboards. And no one else can get to me back there. That is, if they even think to look down there." He sighed faintly. "Just don't leave until we get things sorted out. The Alpha is waiting for me, so I have to go. I'll stay here. In fact, I think I will see if someone will help me bake. Stay safe." I felt his wordless acknowledgement as his mind touch faded. For if the people in the kitchen were willing to help me bake, if I could let them take notes on the recipes that resided in my... They had a cook's love for new recipes and experimenting. I still didn't understand how to set the oven properly. There were over 40 buttons on each stove. Whatever happened to the simple on and off, temperature, and timer buttons? We made banana cream cakes with graham crumb bottoms and real bananas. The trick with this dessert was to sprinkle vanilla over the crumb base and bake it for 5 minutes before adding the other layers. It was a really easy dessert to make. And in no time, we had around 30 pans cooling in the wok and fridge. We moved on to cutting up the salad in preparation for tonight's meal as we chatted away. The other 4 were quite talkative and more than happy to talk about how the pack house and meals were arranged. I was surprised to learn that this pack house actually had 3 kitchens. The largest one was in the basement and sent food up in elevators or dumbwaiters. We were in the smallest one meant for individuals to cook or experiment in. I guess that explained where all of those mushrooms had disappeared to. It was almost time for supper when Will and the others returned. I picked up his scent before he entered the room since I still had my shields up. My headache was almost gone, but lowering my shields would probably undo some of the progress I had made. I turned to grin at him as he entered the kitchen. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and he quickly came over to give me a hug. He breathed in my scent with a contented sigh. "I am glad to see you," he said. "We have no idea who killed that rogue and haven't made headway in locating a scent, so it was likely another rogue masking their scent. Please don't go anywhere without talking to me first." "Okay." I could hear the worry appearing in his voice. Pulling back to look up at him, I said, "Don't worry. I will let you know. Don't forget. I was a rogue for years. I would probably know if one was around before anyone else did." He reluctantly nodded, accepting that detail as truth. "I know that in theory, but facts don't mean much to the mate bond, and I have an odd feeling that some of the scouts aren't telling me all of the facts, particularly that were helping you." I grinned as I tried to distract him. They're probably trying to hide the fact that I nearly drove them crazy. Honestly, asking two experienced fighters to accompany a slow runt-out to pick mushrooms. What were you thinking? After that experience, they are never going to want to accompany me again, let alone even look at a mushroom. I was dumb, and I knew that the two he had asked were fighters with experience under their belt. He grinned as he got caught. "I figured you would have realized that they were fighters. Actually, Ruby mentioned that she would like you to show her how to hide her scent and how to recognize a masked scent. In fact, there is a group that are hoping you can give them a session on it eventually." I had never thought that I would ever be in a situation where I could help train someone. I asked, "Which one was Ruby?" He replied, "The black-haired one." I made a face as I now pinned a name to the fearsome, focused black wolf. "I have no idea how you managed to convince someone like that to go and gather mushrooms. She is the standofist type that only focuses on fighting or defensive strategies. She is somewhat creepy." He made a wry expression. "It took some talking, but she owed me a favor, and I was pretty sure that you would surprise her in one fashion or another at some point. When she came back to help track that rogue, she told me that I had been right. It takes a lot to take her by surprise or pique her interest, and you managed it. So that is pretty impressive." I didn't really understand what exactly had surprised her. All I did was run around and grab mushrooms. I think she only spoke once the entire time. I had no idea how to tell him that it had been me who picked up the rogue scent in the first place. This was also not the time or place to try. It was better left hidden until we were alone. He shrugged, dismissing the aloof warrior. "That is Ruby for you. But I smell supper. So let's go see what they made today." Chapter 27. We sat outside under a tree as we watched the sunset. I leaned against Will as he wrapped his arm over my shoulders. I was quite comfy, and Will practically doubled as a heater as the air cooled down. Will's fingers swirled absent patterns along my arm, leaving trails of sparks and heat. He leaned the side of his head against the top of mine. I twisted my head up to plant a shy kiss on his cheek. He quickly turned his head to catch my lips with his own. I inhaled slowly as our kiss deepened, awakening emotions that I had never felt until I met Will. His tongue brushed my lips. The sensations were much stronger than they had been last night, rendering the sunset a distant memory. My arms circled his neck while he wrapped his arms around me to pull me onto his lap and closer to him. I couldn't think straight through the emotions washing across my mind. They were intense, and considering that my shields were still up, they were my own. We didn't break our intense kiss as Will slowly lowered me to the ground and once more braced himself on his elbows above me. It felt like a fire had been lit inside my body as I still hung on to Will's neck, not willing to break the intoxicating kiss. His hand caressed the side of my face, leaving a trail of heat that awoke butterflies in my stomach. Our lips parted as we both breathed hard. Will's eyes were nearly black as he looked into mine. "Dade, may I mark you?" I nodded, tilting my head to the side to let him have easier access to my neck. He gave my lips a soft kiss before skimming his nose above my collarbone. He put another feather-light kiss on my skin before biting down hard. I winced in pain as his teeth and elongated canines easily broke the soft skin and pierced the muscle beneath. A light lash that could only be the mate bond crossed my senses, and the pain disappeared. Will released his hold and put light kisses over the rapidly healing wound. The mate bond itself would heal a fresh mark within minutes. The kisses to my mark made my toes curl with a new wave of sensations. I leaned in to kiss his own neck, and he quickly reclaimed my lips with his own. He broke our kiss to lean his forehead against mine as we panted. Will's voice was rough with desire. I think we better stop. We are much too close to the kids' playground. The mark had strengthened the mate bond considerably, and after our heated kissing session, the scents coming off of me were something that I wanted others to smell. I gently brushed my thumb along his cheek and asked, "Any idea how you plan to get us to our room without someone scenting us? By the way, no amount of leaves will cover the scent of a fresh mark." His eyes darkened at the thought of someone coming close to me at the moment. The mate bond was ready to take him for another scenic tour of its strengthening abilities. I thought for a moment before saying, "Let me see if I can sense a clear path. Give me a moment to lower my shields." I closed my eyes as I lowered my shields and controlled a wince as information once more poured into my strongest sense. The emotions coming off of Will were not helping me keep dirty thoughts out of my mind. I extended my senses towards the pack house and tried to locate a clear path before my head started pounding. The brush with the mate bond had really battered that sense. Bongeza were usually good at locating a room when no one would notice them. There, I raised my shields in relief and looked at Will. The back door facing the garden has no one near it. The back stairs that the Ongeza often use are also vacant. We just have to listen when we leave the stairwell to ensure that no one is in the hall. He nodded and leaned in for another kiss that sent tingles across my body before he groaned and pulled back. I noticed that his eyes had darkened again. He sat up, and before I could move, he had scooped me into his arms bridal style as if I weighed no more than a feather. He held me close and nuzzled his face into my hair. Lifting his head, he started jogging through the forest to get to the specified door. Thankfully, no one appeared and we got into our bedroom undetected. Will laid me gently on the bed before tossing his shirt on the floor and lying beside me. I reached over and gently traced patterns along his chest with my finger idly. He gently played with my hair. "I love you." He leaned in to place a gentle kiss on my forehead as he whispered, "By the way, I am never letting you go." "I love you too," I replied, a loving smile appearing on my face. He leaned over to kiss my lips. I reached up to feel my mark to check if it had finished healing. The instant I touched it, sensations shot through the mark and our kiss. It took my breath away with its intensity. In a flash, Will was once more pinning me beneath him. His kiss on my lips shot sensations straight to my stomach, igniting a fire that was building rapidly in intensity. I kissed him back, barely noticing that his muscles were tight. His one hand dropped down to reach under my shirt and trace patterns along my sides. My stomach tightened with the feelings that his hand was creating. A faint moan somehow appeared in my throat. We broke our kiss to pant for breath. Will leaned in and whispered softly, "Will you be mine forever and always?" I replied with certainty, yes. Reaching up to kiss him once more, I heard a faint rumble of possessiveness and desire from his chest. It mirrored my own swirl of emotions. I traced the back of my fingernails down his side, and he shuddered faintly from the sensations it aroused in him. He leaned down to plant a solid kiss on my mark, pushing our need and desire past the point of no return.